Hello everyone. I should say greetings because I'm recording this near noon time. I'm sure you're going to see this at different time zones and different time. What I'm trying to do in this small video is to show you how to set up the local PySpark cluster, which uses Apache Spark, of course. And we are trying to see if we can connect this to an IDE, say for example, PyCharm. Right? We're doing this very specific to Windows operating system. The reason is we by default use Windows machines in the classrooms, and many of us hold a Windows laptop. And that's why we hope that this installation instruction gives you a very clear step-by-step process for a local installation. So let's look into the key set of software that you need for you to be very successful setting up PySpark on your local cluster. You need a compression tool that works with all formats, including Linux. So that's why we have picked up 7-zip here. We need a JDK. In fact, all the standard JDKs should work as long as it is got LTS, which is long-term support. But the issue is there are one or two glitches when you try to use Oracle's JDK or other versions of JDK. So for Windows installation, please stick to OpenJDK, and that is supported by Microsoft. And for this particular lesson, we are using the version 17, and we are picking the LTS version of it. As for Python, there's no restriction. The only condition is it has to be more than 3.7. So any version above 3.7 is fine. At the time of making the video, I'm picking up 3.12.1. And of course, you can try other compatibility versions as well. Again, Scala should be fine for any versions, but the problem is we are trying to use pre-built binaries, which basically is being sought from the internet from another repository here, which I will link you to. So in such situations, we have to be careful about compatibility with the Git that comes in. So for safety, we have played with the 2.12.x version of Scala. The binary that is being built is basically from a Git repository, right? And we are trying to use 3.0.5 Hadoop version here. For installation of Spark, we just verified that 3.4.5 is also fine. So we're going to install version 3.4.5. Then we want to test the ecosystem. Go ahead and install PyCharm. You can either use the professional version or you can use the community version. So it is up to you. NUS students are matriculated to receive professional version. So you just have to use your university ID to be able to obtain the licenses. But otherwise, community edition should work very, very similarly. We are not using any special plugins, so it should quite well be covered in the tools that you want to use. And finally, we want to test that if we are able to run the PySpark codes inside PyCharm. So that's basically what we are attempting to do in this demo. So let's get started without much of delay. So one thing is there's a support document that talks about all the installations and screenshots and many minor details that the video is going to use. So feel free to use that as a supporting document when you actually do the installation process. It also talks about a few troubleshooting websites. For instance, if you are using a Windows laptop that's connected to a group and it has got a group policy, first of all, you should have administrative rights on the PC. Otherwise, you can't be able to use the system. And even if you have administrative rights, you should be able to do policy edits. So there is a simple troubleshooting website that teaches you how to put down the Windows Defender Smart Screen system so that you will be able to successfully complete the installation. So if you have administrator rights on the laptop, you can go ahead and do this. But please remember, any kind of defense systems that you're lowering should be upped immediately after your software installation is over. So please be wary of it and please put back your Defender system to original state once the installation is over. Okay. So that's the only security caveat that I wanted to talk about, firewalls and defenders. So that's something that you got to be careful about. Okay. So there's a link in the instruction that teaches you how to do that as well. So without much ado, let's get started. We will try to look into what are the different kind of software that is necessary and how do we do that, what's the sequence. At a very high level, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. Installing 7-zip JDK, Python, and Scala basically is done via Microsoft Service Installers, MSIs. For Hadoop and Spark is zip files, so you got to handle them with 7-zip. And then PyCharm again comes in as a MSI file or an installer file, so it's quite straightforward. If you are very good with cloud, you understand how Kubernetes and Docker works, you are free to try the Docker version of the same too. But I'm trying to keep things as simple as possible so that anyone who has not much familiarity with cloud solutions can still run a plain local installation. So this is common for both EBAC and SE. So it's the assumption about the installation process. Now I keep seeing this clean room software installation, clean room software installation. What does it mean? I'm trying to say don't have multiple versions of the same software. So if you go to appvis.cpr and you go and check for software, you can see that I don't have a 7-zip currently. I don't have any number of OpenJDK set up. I don't have any Python currently running. So not too many versions that gets me confused. And I don't have Scala installed as well. So please verify that you do not use different versions that are not needed for the software. So that's what we mean by clean room. Another place that you got to verify for your clean room installation is your Explorer. So if you go to the Windows Explorer and you go to the PC and select properties, you will be shown the administrative rights. If you click on the advanced system settings, as you can see, there is an environmental variable settings. So you can verify that there is no other software that is being linked. So I'm making sure that there is no other software. So I'm going to check the default path variable for users first. So you can see that I don't have any Java or Python path, which is very different from what I'm going to install. I'll just remove them if it is necessary. So I've done that. And again, in my system path also, I want to make sure that I don't have unnecessary multiple versions of JDK, multiple versions of Python, or multiple versions of Scala inside. So that seems to be very clean. But you see, I Hadoop and home from my previous installation. So just a minute, let me delete that. So you can see that my current environment variables is very clean. I also have Kafka and Minikube, which I use for other curriculums. So don't worry about it. You don't have to do anything. Just make sure that you don't have JDKs, Pythons, and Scalas. Too many versions can always be confusing. That's why we say we need to clean it up. So once this is done, you're ready to start with the installation. To make things easier, I bookmarked all the slides, all the sites where you can get the software from. So 7-Zip's official website is good enough to download a copy. So there's this copy of 64-bit MSI that I've downloaded. For the Microsoft, there are too many versions. I got to make sure I pick this JDK 17. And there is also scalable ARC, which is not of interest to me. I'm going to use the 64-bit architecture, which is currently the laptop that I'm working on. And I personally prefer MSI installer. So I've downloaded this and I've kept a copy of it. For the versions for Scala, this time you're using 2.12.18. So you scroll down, you can see there is another MSI. I download and keep that aside as well. For Python, I just picked the latest stable version, which is 3.12.1. Then I come down here, you can see that there is a 64-bit MSI. So there's an embedded package and an installer. I prefer to pick the installer. So we have picked the installer and we have stored that as well. I've used professional. You're free to try community edition. Both of them work the same way. And this is the GitHub, which has got pre-built binaries for Hadoop. So I'm going to go into the CD LARNT Windows. You have Hadoop pre-built for different versions. We will use the latest, which was done 8 months ago. So I'm going to use this. Unfortunately, I got to download everything. So if you go into the code and you click that, you get a download of a zip file. So do download the zip file. When it comes to Apache, again, you have 3.5, you have 3.4, and then you have pre-built versions of Hadoop. You can pick whichever we want. I'm trying to do one down so that the release is quite stable. So the version that we have picked for this class is 3.4.2. And then we are trying to build it on 3.3. So once you select 3.4, you can see that the file name changes here. So please make sure you have stored this tzip file into your common folder as well. Okay? So it was not 3.4.5, it's 2. Okay? So that should give you a good idea of what kind of software we are using in this installation. So what I've done is I've basically downloaded all the copies. I've put that in a subfolder called V2024. Of course, you're free to choose any other installation folder that you like to keep that together. So let me close all the other windows and just keep only this open. So that way we know we're only dealing with one thing at a time. Now we have all this software that is downloaded. It is time that we go ahead and then do this installation one by one. I like to go in a certain sequence so that it's easy for me to remember how I've done things. You can, after experimenting, you're free to change the sequence if you like to. So I start with the 7-zip installation first. So I'm going to double click the installer. It gives me a welcome message. I accept the license and then I go ahead and then install it completely on program as well as localized files. So this is going to take a couple of minutes, and like any other MSI file, it's going to ask for administrative rights. And when you say yes, it completes itself in a matter of seconds. The next software that I need to install is JDK. So I select the Microsoft version for JDK. Oh, this is 21. You see, I've got the wrong version installed. Just give me a minute. I will make sure I pick the right version. So I'm going to follow the link. Lucky that I verified. The versions can be a bit tricky, so I make sure I get the right one. This constraint is because of the pre-built Hadoop I'm using. So I'm going to go and pick the Windows MSI 17. So let me download that. So I'm going to make sure I put this inside the D drive folder, JDK 17, save. And let me remove the 21. 21 is also long-term support, but my pre-build doesn't support it. So I'm removing. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and install the next one, which is JDK 1709. So I select that, then I say run. So this starts the welcome message for OpenJDK 17 for a 64-bit machine architecture. So I'm going to select the license and agree to the license. I've never ever read a proper license agreement. Very bad of me. Please, you do not have to follow that. With due diligence, accept the license agreement. The next page is about path setting. I would also like to set up the Java home variable. So I'm going to select use the Java home as well. Either you can do this here or you have to go and manually set it up. I prefer the installer to do the job for me. So I'm selecting that. And then I start the installer. So this is going to take a bit of time. And as usual, it is going to ask you for administrative rights. So when you accept the administrative rights, you can see that it goes through a couple of minutes of installing all the Java development kit services and things like that, very, very well established inside the Windows machine. So when I click finish, it completes itself. So that is step 2 complete. Now, as you know, the next step is to go ahead and install Python. So I'm selecting the MSI version of Python. I double click that, then I say run, and it starts. Here I want to be a bit careful because the name of the Python folder is too long, and I would like to have my Python to be used by anyone who logs into the machine. So because I want to make sure that even if some other lecturer creates ID and shares my laptop, they should be able to access it. So for that, I'm going to choose the custom installation. And not only that, I want to give admin privileges to the Python. So I'm going to say use admin privileges and add the Python exe to the path. So I check both of these items and I select the customize installation. It asks me if I have to put in all the documentation. I highly recommend checking all of this because when you're trying to do something new, syntax is half the headache. So there's no point every time going to the internet, Google search or ChatGPT to look for syntax cards. I always find official documentation the best way to go about learning things. So I'm going to select all the default settings here. Then I would say next. So here is where I have to customize the path because I want Python to be used by all users. So I'm going to say install for all users. So then you can see it is pre-compiled as a standard library. And now it is planned to be installed on program files folder Python 312. I can make it short by just selecting C Python. So that's easy for me. So I'm going to directly install this on the root. So it's very easy to pick and then do any kind of environmental settings that I might need later on. So you can see the path is also kept simple. So I can start the installation. Both Python installation and the Scala installation that's going to come after is also going to go and ask for administrative rights. So you're going to say yes when the administrative right comes in. And after which you can see when the installation starts, it's going to take a couple of minutes. Okay? So it's sort of going to run for a minute or two, and then of course the installation process is finished. Normally, I'm very impatient. I'll stop my recording and then restart it when the installation is done. Today, I decided to completely go through the process. So you also get to roughly see how much minutes it takes to do the installation. So because I've also included documentation, it's going to take a bit of time. Not bad because as I mentioned, I have a super good laptop. I've got some 8 cores and I got enough main memory in it, so it's easy to play around. And let me wait for the installation to complete. So you can see it took around some 2 minutes. Okay? So I'm sure you have the patience to wait for that. Very similarly, Scala also is going to take a little bit of time. So we have done with this Python. So the next step is to go for Scala. So let's get this Scala started. So we'll say run. And then of course, I'm going to go with the defaults. I'm going to accept the license agreement. And you can already see that the path is being updated automatically. The documentation is also selected beyond the language, which is good. So then of course, I accept the administrative rights for changing the software. And this goes through for a couple of minutes. So let's wait for this to complete. In the meanwhile, you can see that I have missed out the download for Spark here because I'm recreating it. So let me just go and download this. So I missed out for some reason this select that. I'm doing a few runs. So I got distracted. So as I mentioned, I'm going to download the Hadoop tree. So I'm going to again put this in the 2020. So sorry for having deleted. So going back to Python, you can see that the installation is still going on. So normally again, Scala also takes 2 to 3 minutes to get processor speed. So as I mentioned, it's not only installing the language, it's also completely installing the documentation for you to be able to work on codes. As a beginner, I think it's important to have the documentation copy inside the desktop. So it's usually very helpful. So bingo, that's done. So all the key software that is necessary is complete. So that basically means the basic distribution is okay. So when I say finish, if you come back and take stock of things, we have installed 7-zip, we have installed JDK, we have installed Python, we have installed Scala. So all the 4 MSI stuff. The next thing is to install the Hadoop version and Spark version. Let me see if I have any previous version here. So I have a previous version of Spark, so let me delete that. I also have a previous version of WinUtils bin, so let me delete that as well. So fine. So coming back to the D drive and 2024. So the next step we want to do is to set up the Hadoop cluster and the Spark framework on top of it. So we have this zip file which has the Hadoop binaries, which is Unutils master. So as mentioned, please use 7-zip to unzip them because there could be other errors from different encryption tools and compression tools. So all I do try to say here is just say extract here. So that creates all the different Hadoop binaries that are available from the repository. So you can see the person has diligently created and distributed binaries. I'm picking the 3.3.5, it seems the latest one. So if you open the bin folder, you can see there are a lot of Hadoop instructions like map reduce, HDFS file, and all that being pre-built, including the yarn cluster. So I copy all these files and bring it into C drive, bin utils folder. I'll create a subfolder called bin inside this. And then I'll make sure I copy all these things inside. So that's how we sort of simulate the working of a cluster. And the next step is to install the Spark framework. So I go back to my installation folder. We have a Spark file here. It's a double compressed zip file. So I'm going to use the zip tool to decompress it twice. So right now you can see it's 300 MB file. So I'll use 7-zip and say extract here. So again, you can see that it creates a bigger file, which is about 420 MB. So I'll select the 420 MB file, then go through the 7-zip and say extract here again. So this creates the Windows binary that is necessary to run the framework. It's a big file, as you can guess, so it's going to take a couple of minutes to uncompress the content. When it is trying to do that, you will see it creates a folder structure based on the version that is mentioned. So right now we are using Spark version 3.4.2 binaries for Hadoop cluster 3. So if you open that up, you will see many subfolders. The binary will have a lot of shell script and Windows command. So when you're starting your PySpark, you're going to use the shell script PySpark. When you're trying to do the Scala shell, you're going to use Spark shell. If you directly want to use R, you're going to use the Spark R. If you're directly going to use the SQL, then it's the SQL. So you can see that it has all the batch files for running PySpark on the Windows platform. So that's all you need. But I would rather keep it on the C drive where it is easy for me to handle things. So I'm going to cut this folder, Control X, bring it to the C drive and keep it on the root. It's just a comfort. You can still have it in your local drive. Only thing is when you map the path, please make sure you point it to the right folder. There's a general habit that I follow that all my software installation is usually on the C drive. My data and other kind of document folders and things like that I would remember, I try to keep it inside the D drive. Right? So that's my algorithm. Of course, your algorithm will be definitely different. So just use whatever is comfortable to you. So I've made sure that I've moved it to the C folder. So I have two tools now, one for the Hadoop and other for the Spark. So the Hadoop is basically inside the WinUtils folder. So I'm going to copy this path so that I can set up the path variable later on. And the Hadoop is going to sit inside the Spark 3.44. So I think there's one jar file which is tricky. Someone's given Okay, so I just moved on. You can leave it in your same place so that you don't have the jar file restrictions also. So all that is done. So next is to set up the path variable. So I select the PC. I go to the properties. And herein I have to look for advanced system settings, as you can guess. And then the environment variables. So you can see that currently you will have additional environment variables like Java home, and your path is going to have a path variable to Python, has a path variable to JDK. It also has a path variable to Scala. So all these things were created by the installers that you just used. So now I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to call this as Hadoop underscore home. And this is going to point to the WinUtils folder. So I've done that. I create one more folder which is called a Spark home, and I have to make sure I point it to the Spark folder again here. So C drive, Spark folder. So I select this path and I tend to type it inside here. errors, typos. So I created a Spark home as well. So I'll come back to my systems variable path. I edit it and I'll add these two as the last variables. So I'll say percentage Hadoop underscore home percentage backslash binary folder. Another variable percentage Spark underscore percentage backslash binary variable. Okay. So I've included Hadoop home, I've included Spark bin. So this is basically the version. So that's it. All the path variables are done. So we can go back and check if the right versions of software is installed. Then we can go ahead and test other things. So I'm closing the system variable as well. So let's just test the ecosystem. So how do we go ahead testing the ecosystem? We have to start the command folder and start the command prompt. Just for clarity, I'm going to change that to D. I'm going to say CLS. Okay. Now I want to see what version of Java is installed. I'll say Java minus version. So you can see that it gives me the version 17 LTS support. Then I'm going to say Scala minus version, which is compatible with 17, which is 212 in our case, and that seems to be okay as well. Then I want to check Python minus minus version. You can see that it basically connects to 312. So all the necessary software is there. So it is finale. I got to test if Spark works. So I'm going to say Spark dash shell. This should start the Spark framework without any effort. So wow. Okay, let's try. Hit enter. Uh-oh. Okay, I figured out what went wrong. See, when I unzipped the file, it was inside the D drive, and there were some jar files, which is quite long and lengthy, including the Spark. So when I moved it to the C drive, the files was not copied very properly. Okay, so there were some kind of jar files that were left out. So that's why I was not able to start the Spark command. So what I've done this time is I went to the D drive and then I just unzipped it inside the same root folder, and I'm going to use this directly inside the path variable. So I go back to my environment variables, so advanced system settings, environment variables, and in the Spark home, instead of moving it to C drive and using it, I'm just going to use the D drive directly. So I say D 2024 and then the zip file. So this is all because of the file formatting issue between Windows and Linux that I mentioned. So please be careful that if you can move all the files, then fine. Otherwise, just keep it in any of your local folder and connect it from there. So I've done that. So let's see if it works out now. So I go back to my version. So I checked that in my stack flow to check how it was done. So you can see that my Java works, my Scala works, and my Python works. So now let's try Spark Shell. So that should go through. Okay. So this is again another caveat. Luckily it came up, so I can also talk about it. So let me put that in the instruction. So please make sure the entire zip file and all jar files are in one folder. Okay? So you got to verify whether everything is in one folder. So you don't have to move to C. So still keep it in the drive and point your path there. No problem. It can start. That's a good thing. So this is how the Spark version will look like when it is started. You can at any point on time look at the Spark debugger by copying this cluster address. So I've selected this address. I right click my top part of the mouse here and I say copy. Then I can open up any browser instance and look if the cluster is working. I might have a firewall here. So instead of the full machine name, which may not be in the DNS, I'm just going to say localhost colon 4040. So it's a T missing, so it's a localhost, not host. HTTP localhost. So you can see that you can see the Spark jobs being submitted. How many stages are there? Right now, I've not done any Spark shell, so it just goes on. So this basically means my Spark ecosystem is working. If you want to test PyCharm, you can open another command prompt and then right click it using administrative rights. And then when the shell comes out, you can move to the drive and then say PySpark. So this will help you to start giving PySpark instruction directly on the Windows machine. So you can see this also has started another cluster. This time the web UI is on the port 4041. You can test that. And when you type in Spark context, you can see that an object is generated. And that's pretty much good enough to test if all the tools are working. So when I say exit of 0 in Python, it gets out of the system. And on the Scala shell, I got to say Control D to quit, and it comes out of the system. So my environment variables, everything else is working fine, and all the basic tools that are necessary for running a PySpark on local cluster is complete. So when you come to a level 6 and then test the thing, the last step is to install the PyCharm. When you install the PyCharm, you may have to reboot the system. So I'll record until the installation step and the reboot, and for the second part, I'll push it to another video. So let's go to the last step to connect to the IDE. So I'm going to go to the D drive. I'm going to pick the B2024. And this time I'm going to use the software for PyCharm. Okay? I'm using the professional edition. You're free to use the community edition. Both of them work the same way. So when you run this, it installs a new latest version of PyCharm inside your laptop. Again, it will ask you for administrative rights. So please make sure you give access to them. You say next. The default folder is fine, but you would need at least 2 GB of space to run that. And I may want to create shortcuts. I may want to open projects on PyCharm. Any Py file I would like to associate that to PyCharm. I also want the path folder to be created. If you don't want Py to be connected to PyCharm, you can unlink this and you can keep all the others checked, but I leave the installation customization to you to figure out. So when you say next, it creates a menu and it is going to take a minute or two to complete the installation. But then it will ask you to reboot the system. So you've got to be patient until the installation is over. Once the installation is over, you're going to reboot the system. So what you can do is you can test if a PySpark code is working. For that, you'll be able to put in a small piece of code inside the window and then test it for yourself. So I've given a simple word count file. So if you scroll down the installation instruction, you will see the word count testing code. Just copy this code from page 14. I keep this a copy so that I can test it later. So give it a couple of minutes for the installation to be complete. And then when the installation is complete, the system has to be rebooted. So I'm going to continue this second video once the rebooting has happened. So initially the installer is going to take another 1 or 2 minutes like the past time. So wait until the installation is over. Then you may have to reboot the machine. So as you can see, every machine is a little different, and there may be a different set of troubleshooting instructions that you may need. There are plenty of help on the stack forums. Uh, but if you strictly follow all the clean room installation, version compatibility, and things like that, it should be easy. We have put in enough time to understand which version works with each other, how it matches, and things like that. So please feel free to use the versions that we have mentioned because that's well tested. At least it should work for the next 5-6 months, and later we will try to do another test. Actually, the rebooting is safer, but because I want to show you the steps to install the code, I'm going to reboot the PyCharm a little later so that I can finish this video. So I've completed the installation step, and of course you can see that I need to go back to check if my installation is done correctly. So I'm going to open up PyCharm that was very recently installed, and then there is a desktop icon that was created. So I double click that. The problem is I have to reboot. Oh, not bad. So it'll always ask me for access. I'm going to say allow access. So it's going to get started. So I was testing my machine last night, so you can see there's some code here. So what I'll do is I'll do a fresh project and then show you how it works. So I'm going to create a new project and then I'm going to call this as Python project 1 and I'm going to say load this into the drop desktop folder. And I have to pick the Python version. So you can see by default it connects to the 3.12 that's locally installed. I'm fine with that. When I say create a project, it will create a new project and it will start the windows, which is roughly similar to what you get to see here. Give it a couple of minutes because it's going to set up the Python project. It is also going to connect to the Python interpreter using a very simple virtual environment created. So once it is done, you can see that it also puts in a piece of test code that you can see whether the IDE is working correctly with expected lines of code, with expected connectivity to the SDK and so on and so on. So this is going to take a bit of time. You can watch the status of the installation inside the status bar that is shown on the right hand corner of the screen. So right now you can see that it has created the Py project. It has created a copy of Python 3.12 virtual machine. And then it has put in all the virtual environment here. And if you go into the set of libraries, you can see that the library is created here as well. Okay. So that looks cool. And of course, you can see that it has got itself extended to a very simple external set of libraries also. All you can do is you can start creating projects. Right? So you can simply say create a new Python file. We call this as hello world. And immediately you can see that it shows up. You can say print hello Mars or hello Jupiter. Earth, why other planets? And you can see if it works. So how do you select that file? So you select this hello world and say run this hello world piece of code. You can see that it prints the statement, so which basically means Python is working. So the next step is to connect to the PySpark cluster. That's pretty easy as well. So you can go to the file, you can go to the settings folder, and inside there you have the project Python, and you have another menu called project structure and project interpreter. So make sure you select the project Python project and the Python interpreter. So this allows you to start installing additional tools. So click on this plus, it gets you to the libraries. Look for PySpark and you can see that it shows you the PySpark library. So select the PySpark and click on the install package. So this basically connects all the necessary development tools to work with Python library behind the screen. And this is going to again take a couple of minutes. So you can see you may have to wait a bit patiently. And how do you know it is done? You can see that currently the blue ink that is showing near the PySpark says installing. And when this is complete, you will have a green message somewhere down the line above the install package button that specifies PySpark extension installation is successful. It not only brings the latest PySpark version plugin for you to work with, it may also help you to connect additional libraries that is necessary. I went with the default, so you can see that the default is 3.5. Sky won't come down, but if you want an older version, you want to be very specific to the current version that you're using, which is 3.4.2. You're going to say specify version, and then you've got to pick up the 3.4.2 here and then do the installation. In my trials, I've seen that it's quite pardoning and not big difference between the two, so I'm okay with installing 3.5. But if you're very specific, I would recommend you specify the version and pick 3.4.2, which is exactly what we have installed on this local machine. And we make sure that you get the ideal documentation help which is necessary. So I'm going to again give a couple of minutes for this particular recording to be over. Then of course we can go back and test a piece of Python code. So you can either type in the code, or I'm a bit lazy, so I'm going to copy the file from here and then test it. So now you see PySpark is installed successfully. You see the green bar here. So this means you can close the extension. you'll see that Py4j and PySpark are installed, and even there's an upgrade on the Python interpreter. All seems good. I'll give an OK. What I'll do is I'll create a dummy file. So I'll say new file. I'm just going to call this as dummy. You can also call this as dummy.txt if you want. And here I'll put in some text. This is a dummy file. I am going to use this as data for PySpark framework to count the number of lines inside this data. So you can actually put in any kind of random text that you want. So you can see that I've basically created 3 lines inside. I've saved this file. Now I want to test my PySpark, right? So I'm going to say new Python file, test PySpark. You are free to connect to any other testing. So I say test PySpark, creates a Python file. So I'm copying the code that I got from my workshop here. So what I'm doing is I'm importing this Spark session object. I'm importing the dummy file, and I just want to see if the PySpark is able to count the number of lines. So I pick the file and I want to count the number of lines. So let's see if this works. So I save the file, I go to tools, I go to run and pick the file that I want to run. Alternatively, I can select the file here and say run PySpark. So if your cluster setup is good and everything works as expected, you get to see a warning message. Basically, it's starting of the cluster and the default logger suggestion. And it immediately counts the number of lines, which is 3, and then it stops working. So this is how you sort of try to create deployable production code. Okay. So you can see the entire installation beyond the download. I've downloaded all the copies and I've cleaned my machine before the demo started. If everything works fine and your machine doesn't have any funny presettings or configuration that is conflicting, you should be able to do the whole local cluster installation within an hour. Okay? And you're free to try configure plugins. Okay? So you can add in more marketplace plugins that come in, which are additional tools. So I have a habit of using Kubernetes and Spark, so that's why it's suggesting my usual plugins. So I'm going to just use Spark for this class, so I'm going to install it, but this is not mandatory. It's just to help me when I print my code. It's like a documentation help plugin that helps me to connect to commercial clouds and other things. Okay? But if you're not doing any intense cloud deployment, you don't need this plugin at all. So that's one of the reason I'm going for production code. I tend to test it into Google Data Proc, so that's why I'm using this plugin. For you, if you don't need to test your Google deployment, you don't need this at all. So this is just an additional plugin. You can play with it later when you do the projects. So that's pretty much it. I've selected the installation and I completed it. Okay? And it definitely will ask you to restart because the new plugin is expecting you to restart the machine. So that completes my installation instruction. Thank you for the patient listening. I hope you all are able to mimic the instructions and set up local clusters for yourself to enjoy and experiment as necessary. Thank you very much, folks. Have a nice day or good night, whichever applies. Thanks. Bye.